Hey everybody, welcome to Equity Guru. It's been a while since I did a video here, but we've got an interesting company today, especially for copperheads, with news that Donald Trump is placing tariffs on copper imports in the US, and with the ongoing macroeconomic situation with copper having a bit of a supply decline. I think there's no better time for this interview than right now. Would you like to introduce yourself, Julia?
By all means, yeah, Giulio Bonifacio, currently the president, CEO of Alta Copper. Just by way of background, stepped into this more as an investor a few years back. Very much like the project, like the company, and it's coming off of two previous copper companies I was very much involved with as chair and or CEO and president. So I like the copper space a lot. As Chris mentioned, with what we see in the copper complex. The energy transition as well is a big part of it. So it was pretty clear to me anyway as an investor that there was a looming supply deficit that was going to take place, but now you've got the EV transition, energy transition taking place. So it's boding well for projects like this. And I would add, to replicate what we already have would be very challenging and very time consuming, both costly as well as time consuming. So very, very pleased with where we sit currently.
So give people who have no idea what Alta Copper is the quick 60-second rundown on what you're actually sitting on.
By all means, again, what attracted me to it was, coming from two previous copper companies that did pretty well for myself and many others. Looked at this one, and anytime you've got a project like this that's got an advanced resource, this one sits on, just to break it down, Chris, 14 billion pounds of copper, 4 million ounces of gold, and approximately 90 million ounces of silver. And that's based on a very modest cumulative drill program of 85,000 meters. It was last drilled in 2013. There's a wealth of engineering studies that have been done as well. We put out an updated preliminary economic assessment, but just as a point of reference, and all this information is readily available on our website and PowerPoint presentation. At 450 copper's currently at 550, but at 450 copper, it generates a 3.2 billion after-tax NPV, which is pretty significant. When you also factor in, the current price in copper, one measure that I've looked at is, what incremental increase does the price of copper have on this project? So every 25-cent increase in the price of copper increases the after-tax NPV by 425 million. So you already have a very significant project. It was care and maintenance for a period of time, based on the fact that the company was undercapitalized. That's changed. We've also got, I think, very significant third-party validation, both in Whittle Engineering and also Fortescue Metals. More importantly, they're a very supportive shareholder. They own 35%. They very much like the copper space, and clearly a group like that that's a $50 billion plus company would do extensive due diligence, and clearly that, in my view anyway, is the best validation you could look for. There's also analyst coverage as well. However, more about taking a project that's got an existing endowment, de-risking it and taking it to the next stage. And I think without a doubt we'll be able to do that. And all the concerns and issues as it related to this particular company, clearly a non-event. We're working through them as you'd expect us to.
So Peru is an interesting jurisdiction to be working in. There are certainly a lot of investors in North America that once you're outside North American borders start to get the worries. How has it been for you working in Peru, and what sort of work has the company done on the social licensing of this project?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I would say, being, and as you can probably tell by my gray hair, I've been in this space for a long time, predominantly in gold, and then stepped into the copper space starting in 2005 until now. And you kind of looked at Peru historically, and it was always a very good place to be in terms of Latam and South America. Changes had taken place that moved it to a more negative position. Now that's come back to the middle in a very significant way. No different than what you see in Argentina, but copper production. They're the second largest copper producer on the planet. They understand that this is a really big part of their GDP. We've got nothing but support. And when I stepped in as a president CEO, and it's not taking away from the founder who was with the company for plus 23 years, great geologist, technically very successful in terms of the discovery of this project and a few others in her career. But in terms of process and how you permit projects, I did permit the largest copper project in the last 25 years in the American Southwest. So it's not just dealing with the regulators, it's also dealing with all the stakeholders. And so
Hmm.
we really needed people on the ground. You can't do it remotely from Vancouver, which is where I'm based. So I've changed the team completely, and now we have a very strong social team based in the community that meets with the various community members and basically allows them to understand what we're doing and how they will benefit. And, bearing in mind that, historically with the past drilling that was done on the project, we employed almost 150 community members. That will continue. I mean, firstly, there's a desire to do a drill program because there's so much more upside on the resource when you look at the breakdown of the project. If you understand what they did strategically years back, it was really about, hey, let's move it to feasibility as quickly as we can. They did that, ran out of money, and then copper prices kind of turned in the wrong direction and went below, 250 copper. Everything at that point went on hold. But, when you look at what we have, the upside, the existing resource, the economics, and appreciating that no matter where you are, be it British Columbia, Quebec, parts of Canada, many parts of Canada, even the United States, you do have to deal with the community, you have to deal with the Indigenous, and that's what we've done. And, letting them understand that we're not looking at relocating them. We're not looking at driving haul trucks to the community. We're looking at providing employment. We're looking at also helping them with their own initiatives, farming type agricultural projects. And so um, things like that do take time. And so, I stepped in last year, got the complete sign off that I needed from the regulators, in this case, the Ministry of Energy and Mines, very supportive. The next step for us is now let's cultivate the relationship with the community and explain to them in a very clear way that, hey, we're going to work with you, not against you. And, how do we do it in a very collaborative, friendly way? And, you will see some positive developments on that end coming forth here in the coming months or
So
weeks. Can't ever define it specifically, but definitely progressing it as I projected.
there's always two sides in trying to develop a mine. There's the locals on one end. On the other end, there's the institutional investors. And Alta Copper has one very large stakeholder in Fortescue. Tell us a little bit about that relationship, if you could.
They participated early on in the company. They looked at the opportunity and then progressively increased their interest in every financing. They've been nothing but supportive. We have two board members from Fortescue, both very significant individuals within that organization. One being arguably their mine builder and looked at most recently the execution and construction of Iron Bridge, which was a $3.5 billion project. So and every financing that we've done with them has been done at a very generous premium to market. And so when you look at our share structure, I'm not looking at growing my market capitalization by issuing paper. I mean, I could do that. When I say issuing paper, doing your notional financing through a bank. Excuse me. Sorry about that. I didn't
No
have that.
worries.
Um,
The workday.
so instead of doing that and issuing, full warrants, half warrants, I mean, I could have really done that, but they had already went plus 20% when I kind of joined the company, and it was more, let's work with them. And one thing that I will say, other than them being extremely supportive, is that when you look at projects like this and across the various groups of other copper developers, none of them really, in my estimation, there may be one or two outliers, should ever even contemplate being the builder of those projects. These are billion to $2 billion projects. You really need to bring in a strong group that has the execution team, mine build team, and also a balance sheet. And so, having them in the background, I think is very much a positive in many respects. But I also believe that, with what we see, and historically, everyone's looked at this project as being a top 10 M&A target. I think my primary focus as a big investor, and I've accumulated a position, paid for my share position over the last number of years, brought a lot of people that know me into it with the opportunity that presents itself. But, understanding very clearly that our job is to mitigate the risk, advance it, do the things that we need to do. But it's not like I have to spend 150 or $200 million to get to where I'm at. It's not like I need to spend 10 years. And most copper developers, if you look at that timeline from discovery to production, arguably 15 to 20 years. The beauty of this one as well is that because most of the resources measured and indicated, you can move into feasibility promptly, subject to funding, of course, and start the clock on permitting with Synapsis to get it to a point where it's shovel ready. So it's got all the right attributes in terms of other institutional investors, I'm just starting to do these sorts of things, market awareness and presenting the opportunity. I remain convinced that it's without a doubt a project that people should take notice of and pay attention to. And look at our materials and the comps that we presented with and the type of numbers we have. It's not early stage, and appreciate that timelines to getting to construction ready stage can be rather lengthy. In this case, we don't believe that's going to be the case because we've got already more than enough. And the drilling is more about looking at what they did historically, appreciating we're already sitting on a very, very significant endowment, one of the largest resources not held by a major, but also appreciating that at 85,000 meters of drilling, that's relatively modest with what we've already got in hand. And there's many, many targets to chase after. And also appreciating that, the drilling that was done was from about 2008 to 2012. The world's changed, in terms of bringing it into a 3D model and, adding lithology, alteration, and structure, looking at lateral extent potential, looking at depth extent. And, when I look at simple things as a CPA and a finance guy that's been in mining for a long, long time, the reality is 32 of 45 drill holes bottom in mineralization, and under normal circumstances, you would continue to drill it. And so, those are the targets we're chasing. The drill permit, which was very extensive. It's a very extensive document. It took 10 months to complete. And then it took a number of months to actually go through the process of getting approval. You needed approval with SURFOR, the forestry group, and the water group, and the Ministry of Energy and Mines, but it's, semi-environmental statement in part. That consists of approval for 43,000 meters of drilling. Of course, we're not going to drill the entire amount. We're going to drill 10,000 meters, look at expansion, based on success, continue on with that, and then appropriately, if it makes sense, move towards feasibility and getting the appropriate permits that we need to get to that term that I continually use, shovel ready, start construction. Of course, along the way, are there other opportunities that present themselves? I think that's something that should be looked at.
Sure.
I remain convinced that projects of this size and magnitude of what's happening with the energy transition, the structural deficit in copper, the M&A activity will start to increase in a very significant way. And
So,
not unlike what we saw in pre-global financial crisis and post-global financial crisis. I think you'll start to see a lot of activity in this space.
so traditionally the risk in resource explorers is there anything under the ground that we can actually get at? And then it's, if there is, can we get at it reasonably financially soundly? And then it's, can we find someone to help out and raise the money to get there? You've de-risked all those three elements. You've got a resource, you can get at it. You've got the partner right in the boardroom. So what elements of risk remain for you in your mind?
Well, that's the beauty of it. I don't think that there's enough market awareness on the opportunity itself, but there's going to be a risk associated with any project. But at the end of the day, you've already defined a significant resource that's going to grow in size. The rest is effectively moving forward with the community and understanding the process and understanding how those things take place. So there's a level of construction risk that I would say, which is why I commented earlier that projects of this size and magnitude should never be built by a junior, because they don't have the execution team to build it in its entirety and to do it right, nor do they have a balance sheet, right? So when I look at anything, it's more the construction risk side of the equation. I don't think that anything other than that is insurmountable. It's a process you go through. Can I get an agreement with the community? Of course I can. Do I need to work through that process? Of course I need to. Do I need to work with the regulators? We've already established a good level of success. So yeah, I'm very, very optimistic about what takes place with this project. And coming from two previous copper opportunities, one in which I chaired, stepped away from in 2022, I remain a big shareholder of it. It's doing extremely well. It's in the American Southwest. The previous one left when it was moving to construction. The group stepped in, went plus 50%. It was time for me to step aside. And, I did try my hand at retirement for about 6 months and then stepped into this other one. But, along the way, because I knew the founder of the company and knew enough about the project, it drew my attention. And I just simply started accumulating a position of a decent size. And she did ask me if I wanted to join the board. And that's how that ultimately happened. And as these things go, they always take you a bit longer. They do. But, as well, I also got more and more involved with sort of the day-to-day activity and that's the reason for the change last year. And, she was at a point where it was time for her to retire. And, after doing what was a very commendable job over a 20 plus year period, it was time to kind of look at some things on her side that made, were interest to her, but also on my side. It was more about how do I advance this in a more prompt timeline and change some things that needed to be changed. And,
Hmm.
that's not a critique. That's just a different approach to my view on how certain things get done, and very much relationship based, and understanding that you need people in Peru actively working on your behalf. Of course, I'll travel down there, but at the community level, opening up the community offices, employing some of the community members, getting out there, helping them with other aspects of what they're trying to achieve. And, let's not lose sight of the fact that it's an indigenous community in great part. And so, they're very impoverished. So how do you help them improve their day-to-day living without changing the way they live? Because I think that's a key point. We're not
Sure.
here to turn that over in any way. We're here to simply work alongside of them as best we can.
Obviously, with 14 billion pounds of copper in the ground, there's a lot of incentive for everybody to work together.
I would very much agree with that comment. And permitting, the regulatory side, the community stakeholder side, every single copper developer out there has that same issue, right? And
Yeah,
how to manage it, and to suggest, to hear a soundbite that says, "Oh, it's not achievable," is a ridiculous comment. It's the most idiotic of all comments. Of course, it's achievable. It's the economics, but how do you work alongside them? How do you demonstrate to them? In our case, hey, we're not going to drive a haul truck through your communities. We're not going to
sure.
relocate you. We've got the ability to build a road to the Pan American Highway to the north, 24 kilometers. We have full service port facilities. Our infrastructure that exists is good. Power cost is good. So we're not, to use a term I heard a long, long time ago, and it made me laugh. We're not on Mars. I'm not needing to build bridges and tunnels and all this stuff. We're
Hmm.
very, very well located. And Peru is a mining country, and to suggest otherwise is a flawed strategy. But, the understanding is, hey, we need to, as a country, change what we do, and we need to promote capital investment. And not just on our project, but many, many other projects in Peru are starting to gain some traction. But, I'm very much a numbers guy. I get the space. I understand every aspect of it, from, early stage exploration, development, and construction. The numbers matter. The numbers do matter. It's about the resource first and foremost, in my
For
view.
sure. Uh, Looking at the share price of Alta Copper right now, it seems like in the last 3 months that people are really starting to take notice of the story. What do you think is driving that?
I think more, when you look at what copper prices have done as well, and you look at the space in its entirety, the levels are starting to move up, and you haven't seen for the longest time the generalist investor step in. It's
Hmm.
typically the same guys that invest in certain stories. And, unless you do a banking deal, you don't have the same sort of traction. We haven't, for different reasons. That share count matters. It's not about growing market cap by way of issuing paper and warrants, paper in this case being shares. Um, I think the content, the entirety of the market's risen, but I'm doing more of these type of discussions, Chris, and I think market awareness, and when people look at it, the one question that they come away from, and it's a valid comment, is, hey, there's a disconnect on valuation. So
Sure.
why? So being able to answer that question, I think, is key. But letting them understand that, hey, look at the numbers we just put out last year, fantastic by any measure. Look at the approach in terms of appreciating that we're not going to create a dilution exercise. It's a targeted approach. That share count doesn't just go up because I need to raise $100 million to do all the drilling that I already have in place, right? Not to mention the level of success by way of the drill bit historically and what we think we can bring to it. So, I just think that people are starting to pay more and more attention. And then when you look at certain other copper developers, their valuations are already fully baked,
Hmm.
and they've even risen. So now we're just bridging the gap. Do I think that our valuation starts to change accordingly? Sure, it does. I mean, I would think that, on the back of meetings and incoming calls, and also my phone is very active. There's lots of groups. As I noted, Fortescue has been nothing but very supportive. But there's other groups that are contacting me, asking about, give me an update on the project. We'd be interested in participating in some way or some fashion. So, um, over a period of time, the valuations change, but the context of the market drives everything, in my view, and it's changing. That generalist investor is stepping in, and they're looking at opportunities like this. And, gosh, when you look at this and you go, hey, we got a market cap of about 60 to 65 million. The market cap of the company was called Cadente Copper. and then we renamed it Alta Copper and did a 4-for-1 rollback. But if you go back historically, the market cap on a resource that was much smaller and economics that weren't as robust was already at 200 million. So what's the proper valuation on this? But there was a bit of a legacy issue on it because it was care and maintenance. People essentially forgot about the company, and now what we're trying to do, or what I'm trying to do, is just continue to create that market awareness that here's a great opportunity, but the valuation is still not near what it should be. And if you do a side-by-side comparable on this, you'll walk away with the same comment. You could compare it to companies that have valuations at 200 million, 400 million, 500 million, and say, hey, hey, we're in the very, very same range. And by the way, Peru is not a bad place to be. They're very, very supportive. It's been very clear to me since I stepped in that there's been a change afoot, and, having, one-on-one meetings with the Minister of Mines, who's actually been at the project, appreciates the project, understands that Northern Peru is a place that they want to sort of continue to develop other projects. So at the end of the day, it's about execution, period. So anyone that says, hey, community, you know what? My view there is, hey, I'll execute, and that answers the question. It's no different than that first project I permitted. No one thought I could get it permitted in the timeline I did, and I did. But I did it by way of a bill before Congress, by way of legislation. So I do look at different scenarios in which you can get to the same ultimate objective, and that's kind of the key point. I'm not just looking at one track. I'm looking at several tracks on how you get there appropriately. And so that's what I've done on this one. I've had to roll up my sleeves and learn a lot about Peru and the regulatory environment and the community environment, but I picked up that understanding over the last couple of years, but predominantly in the last 12 months. Head has been down, working very, very diligently on this, and my view from the outset's always been it's about execution more than anything else.
You touched on market cap before. On your investor deck, you've got a comparables chart that shows a lot of companies that are alongside you in terms of size, capital intensity, et cetera, et cetera. And yours is the by far the smallest market cap on that list.
Mm-hmm.
So those that say that there's a disparity there as a negative thing, as an investor, I'm looking for that disparity. I'm looking for that company that's going to get re-rated at any point.
Yeah, I agree with that. And look, and if you look at that slide, it needs to be updated further. But the company I was mentioning was Faraday Copper. It was called Copper Bank. I was chair of it until a couple of years back. That market cap is now 250.
Mm-hmm.
So it shows up as 160, but it's 250. They just did a big financing. I acquired that project in 2018, and just as a bit of history, was trying to merge Alta and Copper Bank. Couldn't get there. That's how I ultimately, also as an investor in Alta, that's how I ultimately became a director. But I think what you see to a certain extent, which is a flawed way of thinking, is, oh, there must be something wrong because it's too good and there's too much of a disparity. I think that's not.
Yeah, that's your
I look at it
opportunity.
differently. I go, hey, man, that's the opportunity. That
Yeah.
is the opportunity. And you know what? Is there any downside on this? No. Is there upside? Of course there is. And look at what we have on the book already, and pay attention to it and understand that, over a period of time, it isn't about me. It's not about anything other than the project. It is about the project and how you advance it appropriately. So that's kind of how I look at these things. And, this comp slide, and I do want to comment on this, was pretty much predicated on, I want to look at companies that are kind of at the same stage of development or slightly more advanced. There's many other companies behind this that aren't even close in terms of a resource, not even close in terms of the economics, and their valuations are 150 to 300 million. I don't want to mention their names, but people should
They're
pay
easy to find.
attention, right?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the project, the economics, the size of the resource, the upside, all matters. It's all very achievable. So I'll start to bridge the gap. I don't think I'll ever get to the top end of the spectrum unless I show that it's a, 30 or 40 billion pound resource. And I'm not trying to be that guy that's pointing to these things, but my gosh, 85,000 meters of drilling, just one comparable that people should look at. My first deal, Pumpkin Hollow, advanced it from exploration all the way through, had 450,000 meters of drilling, fully permitted, construction started. They tripped on themselves, and new groups have stepped in. I think they'll do exceptionally well by it. Copper Creek, north of 325,000 meters, very strong group running it. I'm a very big shareholder of it. They've done a very good job. But when you look at the resource we have, this one's bigger at Alta Copper. It's had 1/4 the amount of drilling, and it's got nothing but upside. by way of the drill bit. And so I think, when you look at those attributes and you realize that, the drill bit's a great way to add value, create news flow, and do the other things that are important. But it's not like I even need any success with the drill bit. I really
Mm.
don't. However, I think if you can point to it, it just starts changing the valuations in a very significant way.
So meanwhile, you're about to drop 40,000 meters of drilling into the project there, which can only benefit since you know where you're putting those
Well,
drill
yeah, the
holes.
plan is, that's what's been approved, approximately 43,000 meters. We wouldn't look at doing all that drilling. We're going to start drilling in Q4. We need some sign-offs in the community, which we're working on. We're cautiously optimistic that happens within a very short period of time. Um, Effectively got the sign-off we need from the ministry. You get the ministry, which is a regulatory body, and then you've also got the community, so you have to work with them concurrently. But that share count's kind of important. 95 million shares outstanding. I'm not here to, as I said, I'm adamant about this comment. I'm not here to grow market cap by way of issuing shares at a low level. So it'll be very targeted. And the benefit of this project is, if you looked at as a placeholder, if you will, to replicate the body of work, 125, $150 million US. And more importantly, I'd lose 10 to 12 years. So those things work in my favor. So I can do a very targeted approach to how much money I need. How much do I need for the drilling program? It's about 5 million US. Do it in a very smart way. Then make a decision as to, hey, how much money do I need for a feasibility study and an EIA starting at some point in 2026. So very systematically take it forward. But it's not like I have to come to market time and time again and raise tranches of $50 million each and every time
Mhm.
based on getting to a certain stage when I'm already at that stage. If
Right.
you appreciate the comment. So I'm very much focused on that. At the end of the day, that's what potentially drives a transaction. We'll see what that looks like, but I'm very, very, very pleased with where we're at today. And the only thing I'm very unhappy about is I think there's such a disconnect on our valuation. And, I think that does change. Very, very
Yeah, I
confident.
think that looks like it's on the repair right now. Before we wrap up, just the one last thing, macroeconomic situations. Trump has obviously dropped the tariff bombshell on copper. That could change again at any minute of the day. But does that help your situation, do you think, considering the
Probably, I
already
mean,
shortage of copper
it,
around the world?
they wouldn't be the ultimate purchaser of that copper concentrate or copper. I mean, we would probably look at shipping it to by way of offtake to different markets. I think it's kind of interesting that he's done that because they do rely, they produce 50% of the copper, 60%, whatever those numbers are within the country, and then they have a shortfall. So I don't know how that works in terms
Yeah,
of math. I have a tough time understanding his math at times. Not that I should speak to it in a negative way, but I just, yeah, I think if you're an American producer, potentially a producer, it facilitates timelines to permitting. I think that's a benefit. There's a shortfall, but if there's a shortfall, that means he has to bring that copper in, and he's going to be, it's going to be costing someone a little bit more money. So as it relates to this project, we're Peru based. They're not our market anyway.
okay.
So it's no different than some of the majors. I think Tech came out succinctly a day after and said, "Hey, no impact on us at all." Right. But we'll see how that plays out. But I think copper prices went up in part because of that. But let's not forget that there is that structural deficit. There haven't been many projects brought on stream in the last 10 years because copper prices just weren't supportive of those type of build outs.
Hmm.
And you look at the energy transition and all that goes into that. And whatever you say about China, they have moved forward on that energy transition in a very significant way. There have been a significant take up on electric vehicles, a significant take up in terms of transmission of power. And your best way to transmit power is by way of copper. And so,
Hmm.
and that's above and beyond the initial sort of demand side of that equation. So macro copper, as I said to someone the other day, I could talk about it, but if we're talking about it, that means you're worried about it. And if you're worried about it, you're not an investor. And I think that people should look at these things on a forward-looking basis. When big players come out, the BHPs, and say, "Hey, we think copper is going to be in this range." When you look at what Tech's doing to focus in on copper production and expand upon it, then you also look at Barrick, which is a gold company, and much of their discussion is predicated on, hey, we want to move to copper as well. And so, there's a reason for that. There's margins um, on a copper project of size. Now, of course, there's a capital component to it, but when you look at our project, the cash flow at just for the discussion, and you could say that, oh, I don't think copper's gonna be in that range, but at $5 copper, the cash flow after taxes, $13 billion. The payback is 2 years. The margin on that on a year-to-year basis is staggering. Now, whether those numbers change a little bit, of course, they're going to change a little bit, but
Sure.
that PEA that we put out is not a junior PEA. It was on the back of previous engineering studies. We brought in Ausenco, which is a very credible, notable group, and worked on it for 12 months and came out with something that very defendable in terms of, hey, what's the capex going to look like, plus or minus? What's the operating cost going to look like, C1 costs, all-in cost, and they all come in within a very attractive range. And so, in that strip ratio that we have, that people talk about grade. Well, on an open pit that's got shallow mineralization, if your strip ratio is 1.3 to 1 or 1.33 to 1 life of mine, that means you got great margin.
Yeah.
So that, those are the things and the attributes that some of the bigger groups will look at, of course. And I think it does point to what this project represents. And, as I said on a few occasions already, the expansion opportunity by way of drill bit could be significant, because there's a second deposit that's only had 15 drill holes and it's already sitting on 2.5 billion pounds of copper, 1.3 million ounces of gold, and also silver. And there's a third prospective project that's had no drilling, but it's got all the same geological signatures. And apparently, according to all my geology friends, and I've been in the space and been around them a long, long time, when there's one porphyry, there's usually more. We've already got the second one in Candiato Sur, and we think there's potentially an opportunity for the third one.
Well, we always tell people to do their own due diligence, but in this case, I'm not sure that my due diligence could be superior to Fortescue's, considering they've got people in your boardroom. So it's a big nod to the potential of this project that bigger guys than me and you have looked over it and said they want to get in. Um, uh, the share price right now seems to be doing some interesting things. You're up about 80% over the last 2, 3 months. So it seems to me like maybe it's starting to come together on the market in the same way it's been coming together on the resource. Congrats on where this seems to be going, Julio.
All right, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time today to have this discussion.
Appreciate it. Alta Copper, ATCU is the ticker symbol, and it's on the big boy exchange on the TSX.